Good evening, one and all. This is Professor Mani. Welcome you to yet another episode of the Wednesday Wisdom webinars of the Bombay Management Association. I think many of us who meet here regularly every Wednesday have perhaps realized that we are happy to start on time and also close on time, because we strongly believe it's not a good thing to punish people who come punctually, waiting for those who don't. Notwithstanding, Bombay has always been a place where we used to say that I got delayed in traffic. I don't think we can say that today. But nevertheless, today everybody talks of net traffic and net congestion. So giving them the benefit of doubt, we'll take a 3-minute breather for them to come in. I'm extremely delighted to welcome Dr. A.K. Sengupta and Dr. Sanjay Muttal, our esteemed panelists for today's discussion on a very, very important topic that's going to affect India and the future of India in time to come, the National Education Policy. Thank you both, Dr. Sengupta and Dr. Sanjay, for readily agreeing to be part of this panel discussion, and it's my honor and privilege to host you this evening on behalf of the Bombay Management Association.
Most welcome.
We already have 60 participants in the auditorium, the Zoom auditorium, if we say so. And we have a record number of 125 registrations today. So let's see how many actually end up being here. A special welcome to Indrapal Singh ji. And I also welcome Mr. M.D. Agarwal, past presidents of Bombay Management Association, who always been very, very supportive in various activities that we have been organizing. So take about 2 minutes, have a breather, pick up your cup of tea or coffee, and we'll start in 2 minutes from now. Good evening, one and all, and welcome to the Wednesday Wisdom webinar of the Bombay Management Association. Some of you might be already aware that once the lockdown was announced, from April onwards, BMA has made an effort to bring learning to your laptop, as they say. Right through April down to today, we are happy to share that we have organized 35 webinars till date on various topics, not only pertaining to management of corporates, not only pertaining to management of self, but looked at a cross section of areas such as self-management, homeopathy for good health, design thinking, also trying to understand artificial intelligence, looking at various dimensions of how the changes around us are impacting our corporate lives and personal lives. Today is a very important session, the first of its kind that we have attempted to do, and that is to look at the entire national education policy, which was recently announced. Lots of questions in minds of people, lots of controversies and debates going on, but then that's part of life, as we always encounter. To lead the discussion in this very, very important topic, we have with us Dr. A.K. Sengupta and Dr. Sanjay Muttal, and I'm privileged to host them this evening on behalf of the Bombay Management Association. Dr. A.K. Sengupta is often regarded as the Bhishma Pitamaha of higher education in India. He has been an industry veteran in the field of banking with both Indian and international exposure of several years before perhaps he decided that he would like to have a more glorious second innings in the field of higher education. Has been former director of the illustrious and prestigious SP Jain Institute of Management Studies, was that person who actually brought the SIS Institute of Management Studies in Navi Mumbai to a standing that is reckoned with great pride worldwide. Unlike others, Dr. Sengupta decided on a third innings, and he said, I would like to focus upon improving the quality of higher education in the country, and therefore was born the Higher Education Forum as a not-for-profit body, which looks at advocacy, which looks at redefining the role of teachers in higher education, and looking at how we can add quality to the entire process of management education and higher education in the country. A much respected figure nationally and internationally, it is indeed our honor and privilege to have Dr. A.K. Sengupta with us here today to share with us his perspectives and preliminary thoughts on the national education policy, and also discuss with us some of the facets of the same. As we always do, questions are welcome in the chat box, but we'll allow you to interact with him towards the end of the session. Let us all put our hands together, though virtually, to welcome Dr. A.K. Sengupta. Thank you so much for being part of this session.
Thank you.
As they always say that when you talk about an academic perspective, we also need to have a practitioner's perspective. And therefore, we thought of constituting this Jugal Bandi for you this evening. We have with us Dr. Sanjay Muttal, over 3 decades plus of experience in the corporate world, a specialist in human resources, regarded as one of those doyens who has dictated the way HR fraternity has evolved over a period of time. A revolutionary thinker, a change agent, a role model for many aspiring HR professionals. Has had long stints with several international pharmaceutical companies like Park Davis, Hext, and then moved on to Piramal Group before he decided that he would rather be an entrepreneur and help people develop, blossom, and grow in the corporate world. He has his own enterprise, which is Contempor Solutions, a leading HR consultancy. Sanjay also is very regarded in academic circles for his thought-provoking sessions and keynote addresses in conferences. Sanjay was an appropriate choice to present the corporate view in the various discussions related to NEP. Thank you, Sanjay, for being with us. And let's welcome Sanjay this evening for our panel discussion on NEP. On that note, may I hand over straight to Dr. Sengupta and get him to set the ball rolling on thinking for us. The first thought that comes about NEP is that NEP looks at revolutionizing school education and is going to change the way education is delivered right at the entry point as students get into the educational process. So we'd like to hear your views on this and perspectives on how this is going to impact all of us in times to come. Over to you, Dr. Sengupta.
Thank you very much, Professor Mani, and I must congratulate you as a president of BMA in the new role. You have been doing a very, very good job. May God bless you in your wonderful position.
Thank you, sir.
I may also add to the knowledge of the audience that the Professor Mani also happens to be one of the founding trustees along with us in the Higher Education Forum, and we are grateful to Professor Mani for the path he's showing in the process of the journey of the Higher Education Forum for the last 10 years. We started Higher Education Forum about 10 years before, and 10 years we have been working together very closely in the cause of the higher education. Dr. Sanjay, of course, is a very, very close friend of mine, so it's a good thing that we are, I would say, it's a tripod. We are talking about higher education, this national education policy. Now, it's a very vast subject, national education policy, NEP 2020, and it's the first education policy for the 21st century, and it is supposed to be a path-breaking policy. And there are many reasons why it is considered as a path-breaking policy, not only for the school education, but even for the higher education. The one is that this is one policy which is trying to integrate India with the world. And therefore, if you look at the contours of the policy, whether it's a school education or the higher education, we will see that there is a tandem in which the policy is trying to move with the international framework. But internationally, we have 18 years of schooling, we have a 4 years of graduation. So we have a 22 years by the time the student graduates from the graduation. And the same model India is adopting. In India, previously it used to be sometimes 21 years, sometimes it would be 20 years in which we used to graduate, but now that is going to be uniformized or tandem with the international trend of 22 years while the student is graduating. So that's the first change, that it is going to be in tandem with the international policy. The second is that it is coming at a particular point in time, about after 3 decades, because the last education policy we had in 1986, which was amended in 1992, and it's roughly about 30 years after the education policy is coming. And if you look at the first policy of 1964, the journey of the educational policy up to 1986, the focus has been the equity, the focus has been on the justice, the focus has been inclusion, the focus had all those aspects. This is the first policy where quality is also getting a very, very, very important focus. Therefore, not only the internationalization, but also the quality getting the big focus, so that's the another threshold of this particular, or equality aspect of this particular national education policy. The third, the aspect of this national education policy is that it's a path breaking in terms of the structural reforms. If you look at all our previous policies, they have touched the contours, they have touched the touch and go, an incremental focus. They had an incremental focus, but first time we are seeing in a national education policy that there is a massive transformation, there is a massive structural reforms. And if they take place, let me put my big one, if they take place, probably it is going to change in which the education is being conducted in India. And as they always say that education leads an economy, probably economic growth is going to be completely in different trajectory. It's going to be completely in different trajectory. So that's essentially the first focus of the purpose of this particular education policy. Now, in the case of a school education, there has been a massive transformation. If one looks at about 70 pages, the original document was 220 pages roughly, but now the watered down version or the final version is approximately 68-70 pages. And if one looks at the 68-70 pages of the document, approximately 60% comprises of the school education. That means the school education has possibly been given more weightage than the higher education or the technical education or the vocational education, etc., etc. And therefore, there is a tremendous focus on the school education, and there is a valid reason for that. The reason is that the school education is a breeding ground. The output of the school education comes to the higher education, and therefore, if the school education doesn't get a proper transformation, there is no point in talking about transformation in higher education. And that's one of the reasons why the school education has given a very sharp focus under the national education policy. Now, there is a huge structural reform. When we are talking about a school education today, we talk about we enter into the approximately at formal school education today, we enter into at the age about 6 age, roughly I'm talking about, and we graduate at the age of 17 to 18. That means I'm talking about 10+2 model. If you're entering at the age of 5, we graduate, we come out of the school at the age of 17. And if we talking about 10+2, so we are talking about, we graduate we come out at the age of 18. Now, in this case, what has happened is the completely 10+2 model will be revamped with a completely different model. And they are talking about a 4-pillar model. So they're talking about a foundation model, they're talking about a preparatory model, they're talking about a mid-level model, and they're talking about a secondary level model. So they're talking about a 5+3+3+4. That's the model they're talking about. Let me repeat, 5+3+3+4, and that essentially becomes, it is 15 years of total school education. And you enter the school at the 3 years, when you are 3. So that essentially means by the time you graduate by the 12th standard, it is 18 years. So now the model is 5+3+3+4. And what it means is now that the early child education, the preparatory education, which used to be, kindergarten education, the kindergarten education, the primary education, the lower KG education, higher KG education, entire thing is now be brought into the purview of the regular school education. So child is supposed to enter into the school at the age of 3, and graduate age of the 18. And therefore, the first 3 years of unstructured education which exists in India, Anganwadis, the so-called the kindergarten school, the pre-primary schools, which were not very much regulated, where people used to follow the different methodologies, and therefore the proper development not is to take place. So now they are going to become a part of the formal education. So that's a massive, massive, massive structure. That means a child will enter into the school formally at the age of the 3. It's a formal I'm talking about, and they will exit when they are 18. So it's a total 15 years of education, which is divided into 4 parts that you talk about 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4. That's a massive, massive structural reform which has taken place. What is the logic? The logic is that the child's mind, the development starts taking place up to what the studies show that up to the age of the 6, the child's mind takes a great shape, and therefore 0 to 6 years is a very, very valid life. Now, what happens if you're out of the school and out of a formal education system before the 6 years of age? There is a possibility that you will learn something, you may not learn something, or you may learn which is not desirable, or you may not learn which is desirable, and therefore there is something structured approach is needed while your brain is being formed, and that's the reason why this massive transformation has taken place. That you will enter the child will enter the school at the age of the 3. So that's a rationale while the early education has been brought into what they talk about ECC, early child care and education. That's a big area. I'm not going into that, but I'm talking about the early child area of early child care and education that has been brought as a part of the formal education. The second big transformation which is going to take place is, and that's at the later part of the school education, and that is we always used to have a very silo approach, a segmented approach of the education. That means after the 10th class, we used to have an arts or a science or a commerce. That's totally bifurcated actually. That's totally gone now once the education policy comes in. And what the education policy says is that after the age of age of 14, that means when you're entering into the secondary standard, that is 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, you will have a combination of an art subjects, you will have a combination of a science subject, you will have a combination of the commerce subject, you will also have certain social subjects, you will also have some other subjects like vocational studies and so on and so forth. That means you will be having something like a basket of electives. What it means is at the end of the 18 years, when you're actually coming out of the 12th standard, you neither will be proficient in arts, nor will be proficient in commerce, nor will be proficient in science, but you will be proficient in everything. That's the idea actually. That means a child will become a holistic personality when you're coming out of the school. And what the educational policy talked about it, and that our Prime Minister Modi also talked about when he inaugurated the the conclave of the UGC. That was a fantastic talk which he talked about, and that I think that a child will be taught not only what to think, but the child will be taught from a very beginning how to think. Because once you start thinking process undergoes a change from a what to think to how to think, what will happen is automatically the learning take place. Automatically the learning will take place, and therefore what it means is the silos of the arts, science, and commerce completely will go away while the child comes out of the new education policy. Now that's going to be a huge transformation, because today a parent always thinks of a child that my child is going to become a science student, my child is going to become an art student, my child is become a commerce student, my child child is born chartered accountant. Those type of concepts will totally go away. It's essentially the world standard. The world standard, there is nothing called an art student or a child a science student, nothing like that. In a global standard, actually, you learn everything of everything, so that at the end of the 12th standard, you actually become a completely holistic person. That's the second major transformation which is going to take place in the school education. The third important part which is going to take place in the school education, and that's a very important thing. We were, let me give a personal example that I was associated with some of the municipal schools in Bombay and New Bombay. And our experience has been that if the child comes to the 9th standard or a 10th standard or let's say 8th standard, they don't know the basics of arithmetics, they don't know how to add, they don't know how to subtract, they don't know how to multiply. So this is a huge problem. Now, therefore, the focus of school education will be that there will be a national mission. There is a national vision statement, you call it mission statement, you call it a vision statement, you call it a wish list, whatever you call it. And that call is that the end of the fifth standard, fifth standard means I'm talking about at the end of the 11 years, because they are joining at 3 years, and therefore we are talking about fifth standard means we are talking about at the end of the 11 years, a child in India coming out of the new education policy must have two competencies. The one competence is, that is, we are talking about the numeracy. That means you'll be able to add, you'll be able to subtract, you'll be able to multiply, you'll be able to divide. That's what we're talking about, the numeracy part of it. And second, we're talking about a functional literacy. That means you'll be able to speak something in your language. You'll be able to write something about you. You'll be able to speak your name. You will be write your name. What it means is at the end of the fifth standard, a child is going to become virtually literate. And what it means is that India, it will actually contribute to the Indian literacy level. And if after this new education policy comes up and it's implemented in full, let's say after a period of 10 to 15 years of time, probably the literacy level in India might go up to 95 to 95%, because every child at the end of the fifth standard will be able to write his or her name in English, his or her name in the mother language, and at the he or she will be able to do basic arithmetical calculation. So that's a major thrust of the national education policy in terms of the school education. One more change that has been made in this school. Now, you know, I don't want to go beyond it because we'll be running short of time. But right, let me say that the other things which they're talking about is that there'll be a lot of teacher empowerment. They're talking about a parent-teacher, teacher-student ratio. In a school will be 1:30. It happens to be very, very ambitious. But they're talking about in the tribal places or in the villages, the student-teacher ratio is going to be 1:30, which is today, which is approximately 1:120. That means a large number of the school teachers will need to be appointed. So essentially, what it means is that at the end of the day, when the national policy is actually implemented, it might take a lot of time to implement it, because they're talking about 2030, not before that. But once it is implemented, a child who comes out of the school will be in a position to have for the fundamental literacy, fundamental numeracy. Child will have developed a sufficient amount of critical thinking, analytical thinking, scientific temper, a value-based educational approach, and finally, a love for the country. That's what the focus of the national education policy in terms of the school education. Professor Mani.
Wonderful, sir. I think that was no better way of opening the innings, and now you know why Dr. Sengupta is regarded the way he is in all academic circles. Thank you, sir. I'll just come back to you after I ask Sanjay this basic question. One of the most common things that is being discussed about for the last almost a decade was when India formed the National Skill Development Corporation. And lots was expected from it, but perhaps it was more of a hype, and the implementation went for a toss. But now that Prime Minister has once again announced the emphasis on skilling, there's a lot of excitement all over again. With your rich experience in corporates and dealing with so many young managers, could you throw some lights on the key features of skilling that NEP is talking about? Yeah, you can unmute.
I'm not, okay, I'm here. Hi. Good evening, everyone, and delighted to be here in the august company of Dr. Sengupta and Professor Mani, both of whom I regard very high esteem. Dr. Sengupta, of course, is a role model for all of us. And Professor Mani has been donning this hat between academics, advisory, and now in a very effective, very early days, but very effective BMA president. I'm so happy the way he is bringing the vigor in everything that he's doing as a new president of Bombay Management Association. Before I move there, my couple of points on the school side, and I think Dr. Sengupta very succinctly brought out a very, the whole ecosystem that change that the policy looks at. But I found 2-3 very important facets in that. They actually are talking about stages of learning. 6 to 8 is called as foundational stage. 8 to 11 is called as preparatory stage. And 11 to 14 is called as middle stage, and 14 to 18 is called as secondary stage. Now, what are we doing in preparatory stage, which is 8 to 11 years, typically grade 3 to 5? The learning is going to be play, discovery, and activity based, which is what is going to learn to more how of things than only what of things. 11 to 14, which is the middle stage, is going to shift to experiential learning. Science, math, art, social is going to be experiential learning. 14 to 18, which is secondary, is going to be more on greater emphasis on multidisciplinary study, critical thinking, flexibility, and what have you. So the whole approach, the whole thinking of the new policy, I must compliment, is what you sow, so shall you reap. So if your investment in the early childhood to the age of 18 is holistic, the product that will come out of that is going to be much more rounded personality adult that will come out of your school institutions and college institutions. So I think it's a fundamentally huge shift in terms of what the thinkers are thinking of. Coming to your question, Professor Mani, we've always grumbled in corporate world that we don't get industry-ready people. Correct. There's a yawning gap between what academic produces and what industry wants. So demand and supply, there's a huge gap in terms of the skill gap or a skill inventory. What the new policy attempts to do is, because of this whole interdisciplinary approach and the whole assessment moving from summative to formative, it is going to give you a person or a new employee who is going to be much more rounded in terms of interdisciplinary learning and the skill set that he will bring to the table. I'm going to quote some of the features out of the policy. For example, we always, as I said, employability, we have grumbled as a challenge. We have always said that when the student passes out and comes to industry, and industry expects him to do something, he has a good knowledge on theory, but lacks knowledge on the application of theory. We now are seeing in NEP, the degree that the person will get will not only help him in terms of knowledge, but it will help him in terms of personality development. Why I'm saying this? Because the whole learning, that bouquet of options that he is going to look at, is going to be multidisciplinary. The 14 to 18, the degree that he is going to get into, for example, he has option of, if he does 1 year, it's going to be certificate. If he does 2 years, it is going to be diploma. If he completes 4 years, it's going to be degree. Now, when the child or a product that comes out of, let's say, a diploma or a degree will be that much seasoned in this new lab, as it were, under the new education policy, because he is going to come out of multidisciplinary product policy. We had a straight jacketed approach to education earlier. Here we are going to interweave as per a child's preference that he or she has from the formative stage that he displays. He is going to have a choice of choosing what he wants to do. With that, probably he is going to come out much more rounded than what he comes out today. That's one side. On the second side, NAP seems to be much more focused on skill development than only building the report card. The whole assessment, as I said, is going to be on formative. It's going to be on what he knows than finding out what he doesn't know. The other feature that I really liked about the new policy is that it's going to look at 50% gross enrollment target from currently about 26%, which means there will be much more people going under the umbrella of education and the skill development. There'll be no hard separation between curricular, extracurricular, or co-curricular amongst the arts, humanities, and science, or between the vocational and academic streams. Again, gives rise to a very, very well-rounded human development that will be expected out of this new effort under NEP. Further, to close the gap in achievements of learning outcomes and classroom transactions, they will shift from competency-based learning. The whole learning is going to be competency-based. What that will do is, when a child or when the adult at 18 comes out to industry, industry also does the whole approach of recruitment, whole approach of performance management system is competency-based. Now that's going to align very naturally, which is a huge gap today. People just don't understand for first 2 years what is expected, what are they being assessed for versus how they are performing. I think this is a very, very big step that the NEP proposes to address. Another key aspect of this is implementation of choice-based credit system. The credit system that the child will have is choice-based. He can plug in and plug out. And the credit will be kept to his account and he can then sum it up once he re-engages again. Now this again gives the child an opportunity to hone what he has learned, get out, come back to learning again. I think I really welcome and encourage this approach by the new NEP. The flexibility and autonomy to the future workforce will enable them to explore variety of options and build more relevant in-demand skills. In-demand skills is extremely important. In the current system, we were doing one size fits all. Engineering program, science program, architecture program, one size fits all. And the new NEP, we will have option, the child will have option to pick and choose the bouquet of options from the vanilla options that he has and build his entire skill set, entire competency set, depending on the in-demand skills that the industry requires. I think I'm going to stop here because there's a huge excitement also, but there's a word of caution. There is always an intent versus execution. We will see that because this is currently a proposal. It has to get nod of both the houses to get into a policy and then a law. Therefore, this is a waiting period, but it is showing a right thinking and the right approach, a skill set, the competency set, enmesh them and give a choice to a child to pick that up. And when it comes to industry, industry also can choose from the competency that the child brings to the table, the skills that he brings to the table. And perhaps therefore, Professor Mani, the skill gap, we are definitely going to see a much more reduction and a better future as we will go ahead. Thank you so much.
Wonderful, Sanjay. You have kind of clearly indicated how the bridge between academia and industry can be conveniently walked through, if I may say so, using the approach that the Prime Minister has outlined in the NEP. Dr. Sengupta, a lot of what you shared initially, as per my request, focused a lot on the early education and the change in policy right from the time the child enters the schooling arena. I'm sure there are many parents in this room who felt very, very reassured about the new steps. May I request you to also focus a little more for the benefit of all our professors and teachers from the higher education space present today with us, what are some changes we can expect in the higher education scenario as a result of the NEP coming into play?
Thank you, Professor Mani. I think Dr. Sanjay has talked a few of the points, but let me try to breach the gap actually that what are the major changes in the higher education system that are going to take place. If you look at the starting of the NEP in the higher education, they start talking about various limitations of the existing higher education. And let me try to say one or two of them, which are very, very important. They say that one of the major limitations is that many of our higher education institutions are extremely small. That means they have got 100 students, 200 students, 500 students, extremely small. The second is that many of the higher education institutions are extremely fragmented in terms of the silo approach. That means we have a typical only the management institutes, typical engineering colleges, typical arts, science and commerce college, and so on and so forth. They say that's not the model of the higher education, and they're right. Because all over the world, whenever you say higher educational institution, whether it's an university or an institute, anywhere in the world if you go, you will see thousands of the students. You will see all multidisciplinary. There's nothing called a single discipline institution. There are certain single discipline institutions, but they're very, very, very rare in nature. Largely, they're vibrant with the thousands of institutions from different countries of the world, speaking different languages, different culture, different subjects. There is a lot of what we call transformation, transitions, and transfers taking place among the students, and so on and so forth. So what the NEP is talking about, that if you really want to build up a vibrant higher educational system in India, fundamentally you need to move away from the smaller size of the higher education institution to the larger size of the higher institution. And they have set a benchmark. They have told that the minimum size of a higher education institution will be 3,000. If you look at the original Kasturirangan recommendation, they were talking about 3,000 to 20,000, but the final version says that that may not be possible to achieve. So they are only talking about that the minimum size of a higher education institution should be 3,000. Of course, that they are given a time that up to 2030 one can look at achieving a figure of 2,000. A figure of 3,000. Second, what they're talking about is that the major change is that whenever you talk about a higher education institution, it will not be a stand-alone functional institutions like IIMs, like IITs. No, they say no. Even the engineering institution has to have a management institution has to have an engineering, arts, science, and commerce. So all higher education institutions are bound to become multidisciplinary in nature. So these are the two major things they're talking about: larger size of the higher education institutions in terms of the minimum students in the 3,000, and they're talking about there's nothing called a single disciplinary silo approach higher education institution, but it has to be a multidisciplinary higher education institutions. Therefore, they're talking about that by 2030 in India, by and large, only 3 types of higher education institutions will exist. Let me put me again, that by 2030, only 3 types of higher education institutions will exist in India. One, the research-centric institutions. Research-centric institutions mean this will have an equal focus on research and the teaching. The size remains the same. Minimum is 3,000, and we are talking about multidisciplinary. But where the focus is equal to focus of research and the teaching will be equal. Second type of institution will be the teaching-centric institutions. And the teaching-centric institution will be actually where the main focus will be on teaching, though they will continue, though they will contribute a significant amount through the research. That means the teaching will not be equal to research, teaching will be more than research. In the previous case, where teaching is equal to research, or research is equal to teaching. And in the second case, it is going to be actually teaching is more than the research, that is the teaching-centric institution. And finally, it is going to be an autonomous colleges. Now, what's the difference between the college and the university? University is meant for what they call whole over the world, the undergraduate and the graduate, and the college will be mainly for the purpose of only and only undergraduate. That means when I say undergraduate, we are talking about BA, BSc, BCom, etc. There will be degree awarding institutions. That means by 2030, they're given a limit of 2030 to 2040. 2040 is to build up a strength of 3,000, and 2030 for becoming a multidisciplinary. So it's a too long a period, but if we're looking at a 2040, in India, we'll have only 3 types of institutions: the research-centric institutions, the teaching-centric institution, and autonomous colleges. And it will be continuum. That means the teacher-centric institution may migrate to the research-centric institution. Research-centric institutions might become teacher-centric institution, and autonomous colleges are likely to transit from autonomous college to the universities. That's a model of the institution. That means if one is looking at 2040, and so many of the young people over here, the faculty members or the corporate people, they will see that 2040 and what they will see in India, a lesser number of institutions, but a huge size of institution. That is going to be the global benchmark of the higher education system is going to exist. That's the main focus, this structural reform. It's a huge structural reform. The second they're talking about that the government of India will try to set up. They come out with a term, the term called Meru. Meru means Meru, the popular cab. So that sense are actually multidisciplinary education and research universities. So government themselves will set up Merus. At least one Meru they will try to set up in one district of the India. And if they say it is not possible to set up in one district of India, it will be near one district of India. That means if in the two nearby districts, let's say Delhi and Gurgaon, they may have a one Meru. That's the idea actually, and that's quite realistic actually, because if you're talking about a 6,000 districts in India, you can't set up one Meru in each district by 2030. It's virtually impossible. So they have got a very political line. They have taken the either one district or they're talking near one district, they will set up one Meru. So we will see a large number of Merus being set up by government of India, and therefore the career opportunities for our teaching faculty is going to become.
Sir, you got muted by mistake. Can you just unmute yourself? Dr. Sengupta, you are unmuted. You have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, that's some problem. There's some phone call. Yeah, we thought that the national education policy probably would like to focus a little bit more where they did not do possibly, and that's I'm not criticizing over here, but I'm talking about that the thing probably that needed a little bit of more exposure, and that was on technical and professional education, because they have talked not much on technical and higher education per se. The logic could be that they're talking about a higher education system in toto, and therefore they thought it fit not to talk about any segmented approach of the higher education for in terms of the technical and the professional education. And wherever they talked about technical and professional education, they talked a little bit about the legal education, they talked about a little bit of medical education, they talked about a little bit about healthcare education, they have talked about a little bit of agricultural education, but engineering education and the management education, they have engineering, of course, there is one small para. They talked about that the national education policy tries to build up the engineers who are of world standard. So that's the another focus with the national education policy has tried to focus. The national education policy has had a massive referral in terms of creating what is called NRF, National Research Foundation, which an initial corpus of 20,000 crores of rupees are going to set up a NRF, and this NRF is going to be the single research. Today we have a research grants which are coming from AICT. There is a research grant which is coming from ICSR. There's a research grant which is coming from the UGC. India has a country where there are a large number of the research grants are available. Small research grant, minor research project, major research project. I mean, say there are umpteen numbers. All these things will go away. They will be under one body, and which is called NRF. NRF will look into the research grants, research approvals, peer-reviewed journals, all patenting activities by the faculty members of the institutions, and so on and so forth. So NRF is a massive, it's a research initiative by the government of India that they have talked about. In a structural reform, there is a major reform in terms of the undergraduate studies. Because by and large, whenever we talk in India undergraduate study, we always talk about 3 years of undergraduate study. Well, in my childhood, of course, in Calcutta University, we had a 4 years of an honors graduate. Delhi University started a couple of years before a controversial 4 years of honors graduate scheme. But in India, by and large, whenever we talked about an undergraduate other than engineering, we always, or other than professional degree like architecture, engineering, we always been 3 years of a graduate system. All over the world, the situation is different. All over the world, whenever we talk about a graduation, we are normally talking about a 4 years graduation. And therefore, what this national education, as I told in the beginning itself, that they're trying to bring the Indian education system with aligning with the international system. And therefore, now they're talking about a 4 years of preferable graduation system. They wanted a migratory system. Therefore, they told that the 3 years of graduation shall continue. But we would prefer the students to migrate into the 4 years of graduation. That essentially means, as Dr. Sanjay was talking about, that after the first year, if you go away, you will get a certificate. After the second year, if you go away, you will get you will get a diploma. If a third away, you go away, you will get a graduation degree. But after the fourth year, if you go away, you will get a graduation degree with a liberal arts specialization. That means that is actually the graduation degree what they want to encourage in the country. Therefore, I will not be surprised that after a period, a couple of years, the government of India comes out with a guideline that in India there will be only 4 years of graduation. There will be nothing called a 3 years of graduation, and that is the international norm, and that's the international standard. So that's a major transfer. In these 4 years of graduation, they have tried to create a wonderful concept. I don't know how much it's going to work out of the ground, but they come up with a wonderful concept which is called ABC, Academic Bank of Credit. That means, there's a multiple entry and exit. You may join today, you may withdraw tomorrow, again you join day after tomorrow. All over the world that happens actually, and you always carry that credit. So what they're talking about is that there will be a virtual depository of academic credit will be created. So if you're exiting, the credit will be deposited in that particular bank. And when you join back, the credit will be transferred to you once again. So that's the way it is going to be an academic bank of credit. And in the Prime Minister, he talked extensively about the academic bank of credit. I was pretty happy about it that he was speaking in a land academics. He talked about the academic bank of the credit. And that is going to be a massive flexibility in terms of the graduation, that you have a 3 years to 4 years. You can multiple entry, you've got a multiple exit, you can come out in 1 year, you can get a certification, you can get a diploma, you can get a degree, you can get a liberal art degree, and so on and so forth. That means there's a tremendous amount of flexibility approach available in the graduation system. And we are going to see a very vibrant graduates when they come out of this liberal art system, let's say after the period of, after this particular policy is implemented. So these are, there are many others, but I thought let's try to confine this. Only last one I will talk about, because that's very, very important for some of us to understand that in India, we are talking about a multiple regulatory system. So we have got a regulatory, there's one more thing before that, that what they're saying is by the 2040 in India, they're given a lot of leeway. Kasturirangan original recommendation about 2030, but the government have extended by 10 years more. They're talking about 2040. So they're saying by 2030, 40 in India, there'll be one type of university. There'll be nothing called a deemed to be university. There'll be nothing called a state university. There'll be nothing called a national institute of eminence. There's nothing called a state university. There's nothing called a central university, so on and so forth. By 2040, there'll be one type of university. You are an university or you're not an university, and a binary accreditation process. That means you are accredited or you're not accredited. So this accreditation of 3 years, the accreditation of 5 years, whatever they have in NBA, etc., they will go away. 2040, either you're accredited in an institute or you're not an accredited institute. If you're not an accredited institute, you don't have a right to exist. If you're an accredited institute, you have a right to exist. They have got a time of 10 years, that within 2040, within a period of 10 years, you have to get a 2 accreditation from the 2 different agencies. That's what the recommendation essentially talks about. And the last point of, I just thought I will talk about one line about the regulation that I was talking about. In India used to have, or till today has got a multiple regulation. We've got a UGC, we've got an AICT, and so on, and so multiple regulation. So what they're talking about now, they're going to set up only one body, which is called a Higher Education Commission of India. That is a single body they're going to set up for the regulation, and that will have 4 different verticals. One vertical will be for the regulation, second vertical will be going for the purpose of the accreditation, the third vertical is going to be for the grant, and the 4th regulatory is very, very important thing, and that's the General Education Council, which will set up the professional standards. As Sanjay was talking about competency, this board will set up the competency benchmarks of the graduate. What does it mean? After passing a BCom, what type of competency a student should have? After passing a BA Economics, what type of competencies a student should have? After passing a BSc in History, BSc in Physics, or BSc in Chemistry, or BSc in Mathematics, or BSc in Botany, what type of competency a child should have, so that globally you become competitive. So that's a very, very important transition which is going to take place, that we are going to have a General Education Council. It all depends on who are the people who are going to occupy the position of General Education Council, but definitely General Education Council is going to be a landmark of change in the higher education system of India. So, Professor Mani, I don't want to go beyond it because time is.
I appreciate. I think you've given that wonderful focus here again on how this higher education can actually benchmark with world standards. And this is something I was meaning to also ask Sanjay. And while I was reading the questions in the chat box, there's a very specific question related to the same dimension that I was going to request Sanjay to discuss. And I read this question from Ashok Sharma ji. How will this policy meet the challenges of the international system of education, which today in India is always seen as something more glamorous? And how can we bring Indian institutes on par with Harvard, Stanford, and London School of Economics, which are so revered institutions in the world? Your views on this, Sanjay?
Yeah, I'm unmuted now. Yeah. Yeah, so Professor Mani, my own judgment on this is going to be that we are slowly moving that way. At least the intention is to slowly moving that way. For example, they are talking about close to 100 top universities will be setting up base in India, which means the programs that India offers and they offer will get aligned. And we will see, and that this they are talking about is by 2030, which means there is going to be a roadmap to align this. So first step, as Professor Sengupta said, was aligning the graduation to international standards. 4 year with research, which is a full-fledged graduation, is something that is getting aligned to the international standards as in terms of evaluation. One important thing I wanted to talk about, especially from the corporate side, is that HECI, HECI, Higher Education Council of India, is also going to talk to corporates and encourage green fields investment from corporations to in the education field. Now that's one area that we suffered. At best, what has happened in the past is some forward-thinking corporations have set up some chairs in the name of founders or what have you. But beyond that, corporates have never come ahead in shaking hand with education institution. NEC is trying to, NEP is trying to even get into that space of bringing in transparency in terms of inviting corporations to come and help set up some greenfield projects. For example, if FMCG giant wants to do something with a particular university, they are allowed to set some greenfield in terms of actually deploying or working, investing into creating a robotic model of a plant in the precincts of the university where they can customize their program and deploy that program. I think that's something it's extremely, extremely beautiful that is being suggested in the NEP. The third, there is a huge focus on digital education. Coding is going to be way of life when you get into a graduation program, which means all of the children that come out of a new education program at their graduation level or at their diploma level, coding will be integrated in the whole education system itself. Therefore, we were always an IT capital for the globe, but today with this new policy, we will also have the skill of coding built in as a graduate comes out of the four walls of university. I think these are very, very forward-looking measures that one is seeing in terms of the intent in the new policy. So that's my view on international evaluation, as well as some of these very important steps that I see where corporates can now really come forward, embrace the new policy when it gets deployed, and derive a win-win situation out of this entire policy. Thank you.
Great. I think that's a wonderful connect between what Dr. Sengupta said and you explained from the industry perspective and how one can position students and prepare them for employment in the global markets, as one would talk of. A very interesting question has come up here, which I'm just reading out and would love to have both your responses. Is the NEP looking at attracting more and more competent teachers willingly into the education space? After all, in India, very often, teaching is not the first choice profession for many people, unlike what we see internationally. Your take on this, please.
Shall I comment on that?
Sure, sir. Both of you, please. Yeah.
See, my take on in terms of NEP. It's a difficult question to answer because there's no specific provision which is talking about attracting the talents, because it talks about grooming the faculty. It talks about benchmarking the faculty's performance based on what you call performance inside the class, outside the class, research, so on and so forth. Tenure appointment of the faculty, which is again the international standard. That's a probation-based appointment. You may not be confirmed if you do not satisfy the minimum criteria. That's a tenure-based appointment of the faculty. etc. That it also talks about in the school teachers, for example, they say that the lesser amount of administrative work will be given. Higher education, they say the more amount of flexibility will be given, more amount of autonomy will be given to the faculty member. The faculty members will be encouraged to go for the conferences, etc., etc. They are given, but I personally, I do not see any provision where they are talking about, because we were recommending when we went to the NEP, we were recommending for setting up an what you call a centralized teachers, just like IAS examination, Indian Admin Service. We are talking about Indian Teaching Service. That was our recommendation. We told that the teacher should be the central point, the focal point, and therefore there should be teacher salary should be increased. Particularly, we are talking about school teachers, teacher salary should be increased, etc., etc. This policy does not. It talks about the grooming and enriching the status and what you call of the existing faculty, but for attracting the better talent in the school or in the colleges, I don't see any specific provision there.
Okay, Sanjay?
We expected more. Rather, let me put it, we expected more.
I appreciate that candid feedback. Sanjay, your views? Notwithstanding NEP, how do we make teaching the first choice profession? How do we attract more and more people to get into higher education spaces? You can unmute. You don't need to. Go ahead. Unmute yourself. Yeah.
Okay. So I agree with Dr. Sengupta. There is no specific effort in that direction. But one thing I liked is they are talking about creating a body of retired stroke experts, including from industry, as coaching to the current teachers, which I think is a fantastic idea, because Hythal too, we have been seeing these efforts happening into two different compartments. Industry by choice was doing something, and teachers were left to fend for themselves and trying their best to do. But here there is a provision that they have made where they will create a body. Each institution will have a body where voluntarily people can come and actually work with the teacher in terms of coach and a mentor. I think that's a very invaluable step, because here a teacher will have some 360-degree view from somebody else who can come and add value to his own teaching. So that's one point I thought I'll park it here. Your second question was what you said, something on industry?
No, we were looking at, in general, academics is not the first choice profession.
Oh yeah,
everybody wants to jump into industry.
Yeah, I think that by far doesn't get addressed even in the new economic policy, because it's not addressing how do you make teaching as a career of choice. Can I go to campus and say that come and join me and you will be the best teacher, versus can I come and join me versus you will become the best marketing manager? Those I think are not being addressed, and I don't know how we will see that being addressed as we walk ahead, unless there is a concerted effort of corporate promoting teaching and encouraging their managers to come and take some dedicated work hours, spend them in the institution, and vice versa, teachers being called to do a managerial role in the organization. What that will do is it will appreciate both the sides will appreciate each other's perspective, point of view, and stitch the learning which will be more apt and more suitable. Hopefully with that, some of the corporations can partner with such institution in terms of increasing the whole, what should I say, compensation architecture around the teacher to ensure that he is leveled up. But that's again a wishful thinking. There is no effort on the NEP side in addressing this particular issue.
Yeah, I think you got that very.
Professor Mani, can I add one point?
Surely.
Because this is for the benefit of the teachers, that we let them not think wrongly that there is no specific mention of it, but there is going to be going to be what I call a ripple effect after a period of 10 years. It will not happen immediately. Policy talks, as Sanjay told, that 100 top institutions, of course, legislation is yet to come. 100 top institutions of the world will be allowed to set up campuses in India. And similarly, about 100 to 150 top education institutions in India will be allowed to set up the branches abroad. Now, this gives an opportunity for the Indian academics substantially. Because let's say, for example, Stanford comes to India. Now, Stanford is not going to pay a lakh of salary to a teacher. Stanford is going to pay $100,000 anyway, whether in Indian, whether in abroad. So what it means is actually that if Indian faculty, where they become equal to competent to become the teacher of the Stanford in India, definitely I mean to say there is a lot of scope, because the Stanford is not going to get all the faculty from America or all the faculty from China or all the faculty from the Europe. This is the Stanford is setting up a campus in America. Let's say they're setting up a campus in Bangalore, in Bombay, and they require 500 faculty members, because they don't operate with 2 or 3 faculty members. They will operate with 500 faculty members. So out of 500, I'm sure at least 300 are going to be Indians. So that means the 300 Indians definitely will get a very, very high salary jump. This is what has happened to the Indian School of Business. When the Indian School of Business came, and when the foreign faculty members used to come, and now with the Indian faculty members to compare the salary, they're getting a very, very high salary, because they told that if the foreign faculty can get so much amount, why not we? There's a parity of salary. So what I'm telling is this 100 institutions coming to India and 100 to 150 Indian institutions going abroad definitely would result in the very salary augmentation of a very good teachers. Let me go back again. So the Indian faculty members should try to attain international standards. They should try to do you call postdoctoral work from an abroad. They should try to publish the papers in the international journals and so on and so forth, which are always propagating. If they do it and they themselves make ready for the next 10 years, I'm talking about the 30 years and 40 years of faculty work, we've got another 20, 30 years to go. And what will happen is normally when they go abroad, there may not be retirement age also. For example, in America, there's a thing called retirement age for a faculty member. You can work up to 100 years also, if you're alive and if you're active up to 100 years of age. So the sky is the limit. For a young, good, very involved, thought leader, differentiated, high-spirited, high-intellectual faculty member, I think there is a lot of opportunity going to come in the next 10, 15 years.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Sengupta. It's a ripple effect. It's implied, but it's not systemic. It will happen because somebody else will come and they'll push the bar. And therefore, even our bar is going to go up. But that's going to probably benefit the top 10 percentile of the population, but not 90% of the people.
Sure.
But still, it's a good step because A, only competition breeds competition. B, because of that, we have seen in the industry also, the benchmark starts going up and people start looking at the percentile in terms of the compensation, etc., etc. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sengupta.
Yeah. And as is rightly said,
Professor Mani, can I just add one thing which I totally forgot? I thought I just take 2 minutes only, not in this context, it's completely different context. I thought for becoming PhD, there are some very important guidelines over here. So I thought I'll just take 2 minutes.
Yeah.
That is for the PhD. Right now when you want to do a PhD, either you do a postgraduate, whatever it is, MSc, MCom, or whatever it is, MTech, and then many of the universities they take a MPhil. Then you do a PhD. Now, with coming up with this guideline, there is a very substantial internationalization of the PhD process. They are talking about that if you are doing a 4 years of graduation, and the 4-year graduation is by research. That means they're talking about a 2 model of 4 years. One is by papers, second is by research. That means in the 4th year, you have to submit a very extensive research paper to get that degree, 4-year degree I'm talking about. So you can be enrolled for a PhD even after the 4 years of graduate degree. That means you need not do even a master's degree for going into a PhD degree. You can do only 22, at the age of 22, you can enroll. That's an international standard. You can become at the age of 22 itself after graduation. You can join into a PhD degree. It might take 3-4 years, but subject to the condition that you have done a 4 years degree with the research. So that's a significant change I'm talking about. There is significant transformation will take place in the area of the, PhD. Why this has been done? This is with a view to incite or imbibe the people to join PhD. Therefore, they started introducing the concept of 4 years of graduation with research.
Thank you. I think that was another highlight which you brought to our notice. There's one interesting question here. Does the NEP also focus on children with exceptional capabilities which are not mainstream? Let's just say he wants to specialize in sports, music, and any of these areas which are never seen as part of mainstream education. Any update on that? Yeah, please, Dr. Sengupta.
Yeah, it talks about that. But I think I did not mentioned it about it, but when they're talking about that you are coming out of the school out of the 12, so they're talking about that you can take only music and come out of the school also. Your major can be music and minor. See, you cannot come out only with the music, or you cannot come out only with the sports I'm talking about. But what they're talking about, a significant credit can be given only on the sports, and still you can become a 12 standard. So there is a significant change. There are two changes. Let me put it in this way. One is that you have to take. Of course, the syllabus is just to work out by NCERT. They have given the guideline to the NCERT to bring out the syllabus for the from the age of 3 to age of 18. So we are very difficult to say what exactly is going to be the syllabus actually. But theoretically, what the NEP says about two things. The one is that even if you are a mainstream child, by taking art, science, and commerce partial, you have to have a literary component or a music component, a sports component. That means every child will ultimately learn something which is not related directly to the art, science, and commerce. Second, if you are interested in any particular extracurricular activity, like you want to come out with the arts, you want to come out with the sports, or you want to come out with the music, that provision is also there. Then what will happen is 75% of the credit will go to the music, or 75% of the credit will go to the sport, and 25% credit will be the other subjects, that is the arts, social science, etc. So there is a provision for that. But we have to wait for the NCERT to draft the guidelines. It will take another 2 years.
Sure, but at least the intent is there, and that's, I think, a very positive outcome of the whole new policy and new approach. Mr. M.D. Agarwal, who is himself an industry doyen with lot of years of experience in IT sector, having worked with leading companies like TCS, and now is a professor at NITI. So he's kind of taken the transition from corporate to academia. He wishes to raise a point and an observation. Mr. Agarwal, can I ask you to unmute and speak up, please?
It's my pleasure to hear the wizard of education and industry, and Professor Sengupta. My namaste to sir and all,
Namaskar.
and Professor
Namaskar,
and the speaker. See, the research is always a focus in academics, and that and what I realize in my career, I'm not talking about IITs and IIMs, there is a need for a industry-focused research, and industry-focused research, especially when so many aspirant for PhDs, So whether this policy has some context in that respect, that what kind of selection for the research topic should be preferred, some sort of guidelines are being now proposed. And in our country, the research, PhD research take too much time, sometimes 5 years or 6 years, while we see in other advanced countries is being closed in 2 or 3 years time.
See, I can answer only the first part of it. Because it is early days. The all responsibility for the research guideline proposals, the policy has been given to the National Research Foundation, NRF, which I talked about.
Okay.
And NRF will come out with a massive document in terms of what type of research should be encouraged, in which area, what are the preferred areas, what are not the preferred areas. And I'm sure in all the areas, whether it's STEM or a pure science or in social science areas, applied research, other than the creative research, will be given a very significant priority.
Okay. Okay, thank you, sir.
I'm sure.
I think it's well said now. Okay, thank you.
I think as one of the participants had observed, when you have all the research grants being awarded by a central body, you really need strong mechanisms to ensure that there is no bias in terms of allotting research funds to certain domains and others get left out. But as Dr. Sengupta rightly said, it will take its time to get all the nitty-gritties into place. But certainly the thinking is in the right direction, and that is what every one of us is feeling very positive about. Sanjay, here's a question for you specifically, since you have worked at multiple levels, multiple locations, both in India and abroad. Whenever any such excellent policy comes up, like the NEP, when you have different political parties who are there in different states, how do you ensure quality of implementation and integrity of implementation of such policies? Your take on this, Sanjay.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. Politics is art of possibilities, as they say. We are already seeing noise on this, even before it has seen the light of the day. There were protests in Chennai for Hindi being made the third language. Now, you know, the pessimist side of me tells me that in the multi-party political ecosystem of India, this is tough to actually being implemented in the true spirit. But optimist side of me tells me that yes, why not? Because in this, fortunately, I see a good intent, which is overbearing in terms of anything than looking at the syllabus and including particular political views in the syllabus and not including any particular political views or deleting certain things and things like that, which is what Indian polity is famous for. A government comes and they glorify a particular leader. B government comes, they come and delete those from the academics. Now, this policy seems much more holistic in terms of taking us where the world is going. And therefore, I don't see much what you say, opposition coming this way. At the time of implementations, the local, state politicians would like to take certain mileage out of it, as it were, and therefore they will do some tweaking to suit their, like the language side, and in the sports, particular sports in their state, etc., etc. But beyond that, I personally don't think there will be much opposition in the implementation of this. But who said, as I said, politics is an art of possibility, and therefore impossible things have happened and possible things have not happened. Thank you.
That's a wonderful way of summarizing it, Sanjay. And I'm sure there are still many more questions. And all I can assure you at this point in time is Dr. Sengupta and Sanjay Muttal, I think, have really opened our minds on so many dimensions of this national education policy. All of us realize we cannot complete a discussion on this in a short span of 1 hour and 10 minutes. But I think over the last 4 months, one of the things all of us have learned that digital patience, I think, is a tad lower than actual patience. So over a period of time, we started with about 84 participants and we are now on 58 participants. It's not a reflection of the interactions, but it's a reflection of digital patience. I think what we need to also do is respect everybody's time. We have overshot our time for today because of the intensity of discussions. All I can assure you on behalf of BMA is many of us present here, if you think we want to have another round of discussions, we shall certainly have this arranged by BMA itself, requesting not only Dr. Sengupta, Sanjay Muttal, and maybe some other luminaries to come and share their thoughts. To draw to a logical conclusion of the session, I'd like to request Indrapal Singh ji, our former past president and a very deep thinker in the field of education and industry, to share his observations, and then we can move on to the closing formalities. Over to Indrapal ji.
Yeah. Not allowing. Yeah. Thank you so much, Professor Mani. I think Dr. Sengupta and Sanjay did excellent, gave us excellent overview of the new policy. And we were all expecting a lot from this policy because the person heading the policy is one of the foremost scientists of India, Dr. Kasturi Rangan. I had the opportunity to interact with him on several occasions, and I think he's outstanding intellectual amidst us, definitely of very high international standard. So we were in good hands in that sense, in terms of formulation of the policy. Now we talking about the higher education. I am reminded of Professor Ravi Mathai, who built IIM Ahmedabad, which has survived, its glory for last 50 odd years. Started in '66, and still it is the outstanding institution. Now, one interaction I remember very well when faculty members had asked Professor Mathai as to what is expected out of the faculty, out of the teachers. And his answer was something brilliant. I have never heard such an answer from any director of any other institution. The answer was very simple, that I'm expecting only 3 things out of you. First, if the class starts at 9 o'clock, I want you to be in the class 10 minutes before the class starts. Number 1. Number 2, you will be better prepared than any of the brightest of the students for what you're going to teach. And you know, in Ahmedabad, I think the cream de la cream were admitted. And it would be quite a difficult call when 5-6-year-old experienced people, some chartered accountants, some engineers, some IIT, and so on, to be better prepared on that case. And I will ensure that you teach accordingly. And the third thing which he said, that if you really want to be student-centric, you must hand over the grades in 10 working days after the last paper is over. 10 working days, all he gave them to hand over the grades. Now imagine any institution, whether this policy is implemented or not, if we were to cultivate such deep student centricity, what will be the level of the students that will come out, and what will be the level of the faculty that students will learn from. So this policy is extremely vast, and as Gurcharan Das and others have written in the papers, and many experts have commented, there are lots of pitfalls. But I think being an optimist, let's hope for the best, that we have to sort it out. But we can't depend on the government alone. I think all of us will have to make effort, particularly the industry and the forums like Professor Sen Gupta is chairing, Higher Education Forum and others, and make sure that we do far better job than what has been done in the past, and be fair to the future generations of the country. Because after all, without education, we can't become a country with a rightful place under the sun. So these are the few things I wanted to say, and congratulations to you, Professor Mani, for this excellent program today. And I think we should have a little longish program on this at a later date on slightly different agenda. And I think build on this theme. So thank you so much, everyone.
Certainly, sir. Thank you so much for your observations and good words. We appreciate your support to all these programs. And as all good things come to an, we never say end in BMA. We say all good things come to a pause. And we're just taking a pause here so that we can come back and relearn all over again many dimensions. To serve as a memory of this get-together that we had today, a charcha, but without chai, because we are still in the digital world, I'd like to request everybody to put on your videos so that we have a group video picture, if you understand what I'm saying, to serve as a memory of your participation in this wonderful program. We always allow 2 minutes for people to get ready in case you're not. So take your 2 minutes. We have 3 screens, so everybody be a little patient so that we can capture your presence on a picture. You can see yourself over social media as marking your attendance for this session. I know there are many teachers who are used to taking attendance, but here in BMA, we take the attendance so that you also remember this wonderful time that we spent together. We have a wonderful digitally qualified photography team. No, nothing so serious. We have an excellent secretariat who is now digitally expert, and they're going to do the honors. So put on your best smiles and give them about 2 minutes so that we capture some of these wonderful moments that we spent together. While you get ready, and I'm so happy, screen 1 is already ready. So that's, I think the word is going around that BMA takes pictures. So come on with your best smiles and come ready. So screen 1, 2, and 3, all of you, please get ready for this group photograph. Thank you. And while you keep smiling, let me tell you the next program that we have on Friday is how to deal with difficult people. And this is being orchestrated by Dr. Anil Garg, who is a trainer par excellence with about 30 years of corporate experience. Next Wednesday, we have another very interesting topic, and that is the importance of coaching in these COVID times and how coaching can be an integral part of corporate recovery for so many executives. This is being presented by Mr. C.N. Murthy, who is the president of the International Coaching Federation Mumbai chapter. And next week, after that, on Friday, once again, as part of our Friday Fundamentals MDP, we have the doyen in the field of industry and academia, Dr. Ganesh Natarajan, who will be presenting a seminar along with his colleagues in Schaefer Ruya Associates on how one can recover post-COVID and still make an impact in business and industry. So stay tuned with our various offerings. Those of us who are members of BMA, you do get all the intimations. Those of us who are friends and well-wishers of BMA are requested to join up the BMA family so that we can be part of more such learning sessions together. Thank you very much, everyone, for spending your evening here trying to be part of this learning journey that BMA has begun in the form of Wednesday Wisdom webinars and Friday Fundamentals EMDP. Stay safe, stay blessed as we move on from unlock to period. And thank you, Dr. Sengupta, once again. And thank you so much, Sanjay. We look forward to more and more learning opportunities with you. On that note, BMA and me, Professor Mani, sign off for this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks.